Before there was life, before oceans shimmered or skies turned blue, there was only chaos, a young Earth, barely formed, trembling and furious, a world born in fire. Imagine standing where continents one day would rise, and instead seeing rivers of molten rock, lightning slicing through toxic skies, and a rain of meteors turning night into endless dawn. Every mountain you see today was once dust, every ocean once steam, and every breath of air once poison. Our home was not the peaceful blue marble we know. It was a violent, unpredictable monster. And yet, from that chaos, something extraordinary happened. The same storms that shattered this planet built it. The same fires that burned it forged the crust beneath your feet. The same ice that froze it prepared it for life. This is the forgotten origin story of our world. A story of destruction, rebirth, and impossible survival. A time when Earth itself was the battlefield, and from that chaos, the first foundations of life were quietly being written. Before there were humans, before there were dinosaurs, before there was even air to breathe, there was Earth's violent childhood, fire, ice, and meteor storms. Imagine the universe as a vast construction site, a chaos of fire, dust, and lightning. In that darkness, somewhere around 0.6 billion years ago, a young star began to burn, our sun. Around it, debris from ancient stellar explosions swirled in a deadly cosmic ballet. Shattered rock, frozen gas, and metallic fragments smashed together at unimaginable speeds. There was no peace, no silence, only thunder in space. Out of that mayhem, our planet began to take shape, not born gently, but forged in violence. Earth began as nothing more than a growing clump of matter pulled together by gravity's relentless hand. Each collision added more heat, more mass, and more motion, until what we call Earth was a fiery, molten sphere. The surface wasn't solid ground, it was a restless ocean of liquid rock, glowing red, hot, rolling and boiling like waves of flame. Temperatures soared above 2,000 degrees Celsius. Anything that tried to exist on that surface would have been instantly vaporized. In those first chaotic millions of years, our world was under constant attack. Space wasn't empty, it was a minefield, leftover fragments from the birth of the solar system. Some as small as mountains, others the size of planets, came crashing into young Earth. Each impact released more energy than 1 billion atomic bombs. Mountains evaporated, seas of magma rippled outward, and the air turned into glowing vapor. The surface melted, cracked, and reshaped itself over and over again. It was during one of these cosmic collisions that Earth's destiny changed forever. A Mars-sized body, known by scientists today as Theia, slammed into Earth with unimaginable force. The entire planet trembled, molten rock splashed into space, and debris began to orbit the fiery globe. Out of that wreckage, the moon was born. The impact tore part of Earth's outer layers away, but in doing so, it gave us a satellite that would one day stabilize our rotation, control our tides, and guide the rhythms of life itself. The Earth that emerged from that event was even hotter than before, a planet in total meltdown. Lava rivers glowed for thousands of years. The atmosphere was thick with toxic gases, carbon dioxide, sulfur, ammonia, a suffocating brew that made the air unbreathable. The skies were never clear, they shimmered with volcanic ash and lightning, the heavens constantly flashing with the electric rage of creation. The oceans we know today were still steam in the air, floating above a world that had no color, no calm, no mercy. But even in this chaos, something remarkable was happening beneath the fury. As Earth's molten core churned and spun, it began generating a magnetic field, a protective shield that would one day defend life from the sun's deadly radiation. The heavy elements, like iron and nickel, sank to the center, forming the core while lighter materials floated up, creating the first crust. Every explosion, every eruption, every impact, it all played a part in sculpting the foundations of a living planet. Over time, the bombardment began to slow. The fires that once consumed the Earth started to fade. The magma oceans cooled just enough for a thin crust to form, fragile, cracked, but stable enough to survive. Steam and gas escaped from deep within, rising into the atmosphere and condensing into clouds. And for the first time, the relentless rain began to fall, not for hours, not for days, but for centuries. Endless rain cooled the molten surface, carving the first basins that would become oceans. Every drop that fell was a survivor's story, water delivered by comets and asteroids that had once been the agents of destruction. The very same impacts that scarred the young planet brought with them the ingredients of life: carbon, water, organic molecules. The universe was recycling chaos into creation. When the rain finally stopped, the Earth was transformed. The molten inferno had become a world of rock and water, scarred but alive in its own way. Volcanoes still roared. The skies still burned with lightning, but beneath the surface, the temperature dropped just enough for chemistry to begin, the slow, patient dance that would billions of years later give birth to life. The story of Earth's birth is not one of calm or comfort. It's a saga of collisions, fire, and survival, a world that refused to die, no matter how many times it was shattered. From that endless storm, a planet emerged that would one day cradle oceans, forests, and humanity itself. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step we take on this ground is a whisper from that violent beginning, a reminder that from destruction, beauty can rise. The skies above the young Earth were never still. They burned with constant motion, streaks of fire tearing across the darkness, every second another flash of light that marked a world under siege. For millions of years, the early solar system was a violent playground, a storm of wandering rocks and frozen wanderers colliding endlessly. Earth, still young and hot from its birth, became the target of a relentless bombardment. This was not a passing shower, it was a cosmic rain of death and creation, the era we now call the Late Heavy Bombardment, a time when the heavens themselves seemed determined to sculpt, scar, and transform the planet forever. Each meteor that entered Earth's chaotic orbit carried unimaginable energy. Some were no bigger than mountains, others the size of small planets. When they struck, the world shook to its core. Shockwaves rolled across molten plains, vaporizing everything in their path. Oceans of lava erupted, filling craters as quickly as they were formed. The atmosphere, thick with gas, dust, and volcanic smoke, turned into a boiling haze. Day and night blurred together under the glow of falling fire. But what appeared to be destruction was, in truth, construction. Each impact changed the planet's chemistry, delivering new elements from distant parts of the solar system. Some of those meteors carried carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, the raw ingredients for life itself. Others were icy travelers from the outer solar system, their cores filled with frozen water. When they slammed into Earth, they released their hidden cargo, adding moisture to the air and to the cracks of the cooling crust. Slowly, drop by drop, those celestial messengers helped create the first traces of water on the surface. The Earth at this time was like a cauldron, boiling, unstable, yet pregnant with possibility. The heat of each impact melted rock into oceans of magma, but the cooling afterward forged new minerals, new layers, and new chemistry. It was as if the universe were hammering our world into shape, each blow adding another layer of complexity. If you could stand on Earth during that time, though you wouldn't survive for even a moment, you'd see an endless storm of fire from the sky. The ground beneath your feet would quake constantly, the air would shimmer with heat, and the horizon would glow from the aftermath of every collision. And yet, amid all that fury, something extraordinary was beginning to stir. The meteorites that fell weren't just random rocks, many were ancient time capsules. Inside them were amino acids, simple organic molecules that would one day form the foundation of life. They had traveled billions of miles, surviving through the birth of stars and the collapse of worlds, only to find their final resting place here on a young planet that had not yet taken its first living breath. Every impact mixed these cosmic ingredients into Earth's surface, cooking them with heat, lightning, and pressure. In the pools and cracks left behind, the first chemical reactions of life's recipe began. It was not life yet, not even close, but it was the beginning of the possibility. The chaos that had seemed so merciless was, in truth, a careful sculptor. Out of destruction, it was seeding potential. Scientists believe that without this cosmic rain, Earth might never have become a living world. The comets and asteroids that bombarded it did more than shape its geography. They delivered the building blocks of oceans and life. The same icy travelers that devastated the planet also filled its scars with water, turning deserts of rock into basins of steam and eventually seas of blue. From the sky came the water that would one day cradle fish, forests, and humankind. The violence lasted hundreds of millions of years. Craters upon craters marked the planet's surface, and even when the bombardment slowed, the echoes of those collisions remained, deep scars hidden beneath today's continents and oceans. Each one tells a story of a world in progress, a planet that survived everything the universe could throw at it. When the skies finally began to calm, when the rain of fire faded, and the last of the great impacts cooled to silence, Earth was no longer a raw, molten sphere. It had become something new, a world with a crust, an atmosphere, and the first traces of water. The rain of destruction had turned into the rain of creation. Above the smoking craters, the clouds began to form. The first true storm swept across the surface, powered by volcanic heat and cosmic dust. The planet still glowed with heat, but within that glow, something sacred was beginning to emerge, a planet ready to evolve. Every ocean wave today, every drop of water, every breath we take, all of it traces back to that age of falling stars. We are, in the most literal sense, children of the meteor storms. The water in your veins, the carbon in your body, the minerals in your bones. They came from those ancient visitors that once lit up the skies of a wild and unrecognizable Earth. The skies above the young Earth were not blue, not calm, not even recognizable. They churned with poison and fire. Imagine a world where the air itself glows red with heat and lightning dances from horizon to horizon. Not the kind of lightning we know today, but bolts of raw electricity so powerful they could split mountains. The atmosphere was thick, heavy, and suffocating, filled with choking clouds of carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur, and ammonia. It was a sky that would kill anything that dared to breathe it. But there was nothing alive yet to fear it, only the silent witness of a newborn planet still learning how to exist. This was Earth's first true atmosphere, and it was more alien than any other world we've ever seen. Volcanoes exploded endlessly, vomiting smoke and ash into the air. Gases from the planet's molten interior escaped through cracks in the crust, rising upward and forming a dark shroud around the globe. Sunlight barely reached the surface. The light that did was tinted orange and red, giving the world an eerie glow. Rain didn't fall gently, it hissed as it hit the ground, turning to steam on contact. The oceans were still forming, boiling and churning with dissolved minerals and acid. But even in this hellish chaos, the stage was being set for something extraordinary. The toxic clouds that wrapped around the planet weren't just signs of death, they were filled with the ingredients of creation. Within those gases were the same elements that, billions of years later, would make up every living thing: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. Nature was experimenting, mixing, and transforming in the most violent laboratory imaginable. And then came the lightning. Endless roaring storms rolled across the sky for centuries at a time. Bolts of electricity struck the molten ground, splitting molecules apart and forcing them to recombine into new forms. These were not random sparks, they were the universe's first chemistry experiments. When lightning struck the thick soup of gases, it created complex organic molecules, amino acids, nitriles, and hydrocarbons. These were the first building blocks of life, born not in peace, but in fury. Every storm that raged above ancient Earth was an act of creation disguised as destruction. The energy of those storms turned lifeless matter into something more, something that could one day organize, replicate, and evolve. It's believed that lightning in those early skies helped produce entire oceans full of chemical potential. In those dark waters, reactions began that would one day lead to the first living cells. The smell of the air would have been unbearable. Sulfur and burning rock mixed with the metallic tang of lightning. The skies would have looked alive, flashing constantly, pulsing with energy like veins of fire across the heavens. The sound would have been deafening, thunder that never stopped, echoing across the molten plains. Yet beneath that chaos, the planet was stabilizing. Slowly, the toxic atmosphere was thickening and cooling. The constant volcanic eruptions began releasing more water vapor, and the planet's temperature began to drop just enough for steam to condense and form heavier clouds. The first real rains fell, acid rain, thick and steaming but persistent. Drop by drop, it began to cleanse the air. Those rains carried minerals from the land into the forming oceans, mixing everything together. Gases from the sky, elements from the crust, energy from lightning. It was a cosmic recipe slowly stirring itself. And though no eyes yet existed to see it, this was the most important transformation in the planet's history. From toxic chaos came the foundation for life. The lightning that struck the primordial seas was like a divine spark, an unseen force writing the first chapter of biology across the surface of a wild, violent world. The storms eventually calmed, but their legacy remained. The air was still poisonous, the oceans still acidic, but the chemistry had changed forever. Molecules that had never existed before now drifted in the atmosphere and swirled in the waters. They were fragile, simple, and easily destroyed, but they were new. They were the ancestors of everything that would follow. From the perspective of deep time, these storms were miracles. Without them, there would be no oceans, no cells, no plants, no humans. The lightning that tore the skies apart billions of years ago is the same energy that still burns inside us, the pulse of life that started in fire and storm. When we look up at the calm blue sky today, we are staring at the descendant of that violent beginning, a sky once filled with chaos, now gentle enough to sustain life. The same air that once poisoned the world now carries our breath. The same lightning that once split molecules now dances quietly in distant storms. The earth remembers, even if we do not, that life was born not from peace, but from fury. The fire faded, the storms slowed, the once blazing world that had been forged in endless heat began to cool, and slowly, almost silently, Earth entered one of its darkest and most mysterious chapters. The planet that had been born from flame now found itself buried under a cloak of ice. No longer a blazing inferno, Earth became something unimaginable, a frozen marble drifting through the blackness of space. This was the time of the first great freeze, a moment when our planet nearly died before life had even begun. The change did not come overnight. For millions of years, volcanoes had filled the air with gas and ash, blocking sunlight and cooling the surface. The young sun, still weaker than the star we know today, provided only faint warmth. The oceans, once boiling and alive with chemical storms, began to chill. Steam condensed, clouds thickened, and rain turned cold. Layer upon layer of ice began to creep outward from the poles, swallowing valleys, mountains, and entire continents. Imagine standing on that ancient Earth. The air is thin and bitter, the sky a pale gray void. Snow falls endlessly, whispering across a landscape of silence. The oceans have begun to freeze from the top down, locking the planet beneath a shell of white. The winds scream across the empty plains, carrying shards of ice like blades. Beneath the surface, the few warm pockets that remain struggle to resist the cold, but even they begin to fade. It was as if the planet had stopped breathing. Temperatures dropped to levels that would have destroyed nearly every living thing if life had truly begun by then. For aeons, the world remained a frozen tomb, sunlight reflected back into space by sheets of bright ice. Scientists call this period Snowball Earth, and it may have lasted tens of millions of years. Our planet was so completely frozen that even the equator shimmered with frost, yet deep below the surface, the fires of Earth still burned. Beneath the miles of ice, the core remained molten, and volcanic forces continued their eternal work. From cracks in the crust, heat and gas escaped, slowly changing the balance once again. Carbon dioxide, trapped for centuries, began to fill the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect, silent and patient, started to build. With time, the invisible blanket of gas thickened, holding in the planet's fading warmth. As volcanic eruptions grew more frequent, they darkened the skies once more, but now they carried with them the key to salvation. Each plume of ash, each burst of carbon, added fuel to the slow revival. Eventually, the heat trapped beneath the ice began to rise, the glaciers cracked, the surface groaned, and the great thaw began. Imagine it, the moment the first beams of sunlight pierced the ice after millions of years. Vast sheets began to melt, rushing toward the oceans as roaring rivers. Steam hissed from every crevice. The frozen silence gave way to the deafening sound of the planet awakening. The meltwater carried minerals and nutrients into the seas, enriching them beyond anything they had ever known. From this catastrophic freeze came renewal, the kind that would one day feed the first true ecosystems. The Great Freeze had nearly ended the possibility of life, but paradoxically it also prepared the world for it. The pressure and chemistry of the long winter altered rocks, carved mountains, and transformed oceans. Iron that had once been trapped beneath the crust was released, spreading through the waters and turning them red. Carbon that had been sealed away now cycled back into the air, stabilizing the climate for the first time. The Earth was no longer the wild inferno it once had been, nor was it the frozen tomb it had become. It was something new, balanced, tempered, and ready. The storms would return, the volcanoes would roar again, but this time the planet was stronger. The Great Freeze had taught the Earth to regulate its own breath, to balance warmth and cold, chaos and calm. If you looked at it from space then, you'd see a planet reborn, streaks of ice melting into rivers, vast oceans shimmering in the new sunlight, clouds swirling over a world that had survived the impossible. The fire and the frost had shaped the same destiny, a world ready to host life. The great irony of Earth's first winter is that it didn't end life, it may have made life possible. Beneath the melting ice, the oceans were now rich with the very minerals and chemical energy that early microbes would need to survive. In the aftermath of devastation, the seeds of creation began to stir once more. The planet had survived its coldest trial. It had endured both fire and ice, chaos and silence, destruction and rebirth. And as the last glaciers retreated, the Earth turned once more toward the sun, ready for the next chapter in its ancient, unstoppable story. Beneath the frozen silence, the planet still breathed. Deep inside Earth's heart, fire refused to die. The mantle churned, restless and alive, and even while the surface lay buried under endless ice, the core pulsed like a heartbeat that could not be silenced. For millions of years, heat built up beneath the crust, pressure rising, gases trapped, energy waiting to escape. And then, when the world could no longer contain its fury, the planet tore itself open. The ice cracked like glass. From the darkness below, volcanoes erupted with unimaginable force, piercing the frozen surface and vomiting molten rock into the icy air. Rivers of lava spilled across glaciers, hissing and roaring as fire met frost. Massive clouds of steam exploded upward, turning the white world gray with smoke and ash. The quiet that had once covered Earth shattered into chaos once again. The Great Freeze had ended not with a thaw, but with an explosion, a rebirth through destruction. These eruptions weren't random, they were the planet's survival instinct. The same volcanic fury that had once made Earth uninhabitable was now bringing it back to life. Each eruption released heat and gases trapped within: carbon dioxide, water vapor, sulfur, and methane. These gases rose into the atmosphere, thickening it once again, trapping heat and slowly melting the frozen shell that had entombed the world. The greenhouse effect, which had once been deadly, now became the planet's salvation. Imagine the sight: vast fields of lava glowing through cracks in the ice, turning glaciers into rivers, filling valleys with boiling water. Ash fell like black snow, blanketing the frozen plains. Every eruption painted the sky with fire, lightning flashing within the volcanic plumes as if the heavens themselves were awakening. The air was thick with heat and minerals, the oceans simmered beneath their icy lids, and the planet trembled as it transformed. From these volcanoes poured more than just heat, they carried the chemical gifts that would feed the next stage of evolution. Deep in the ocean, where lava met water, minerals like iron, sulfur, and phosphorus began to mix into the seas. These nutrients created underwater oases, hydrothermal vents, where boiling water burst from the seafloor like black smoke. Around these vents, the chemistry of life began to stir. Scientists believe that it was in places like these, at the edge of fire and water, where the first living molecules began to form. Protected from the chaos above, nurtured by the heat below, simple organic compounds began to organize themselves into more complex forms. The same fire that had once threatened to end everything now gave life its first safe haven. As the ice melted, the oceans grew deeper and wider. Rain returned, washing minerals from the land into the sea. The atmosphere thickened with new gases, and the planet's temperature began to stabilize. The Earth was healing itself, reshaping, rebuilding, and breathing once again. The rebirth from below wasn't just geological, it was chemical, biological, and cosmic. Every eruption, every ash cloud, every plume of steam was part of the planet's comeback. The surface that had been barren and frozen for millions of years now shimmered with new oceans and steaming shores. The sky, once gray and lifeless, turned golden again as sunlight broke through the thinning clouds. The air was still harsh, still toxic by modern standards, but it carried the whispers of oxygen, faint traces released by volcanic reactions, and perhaps, just perhaps, by the earliest microbes beginning to test their strength. The Earth had come full circle, from fire to ice and back again. Each cycle, each catastrophe, carved the world closer to balance. The crust thickened, the continents began to form, and the oceans became vast reservoirs of chemical potential. From deep beneath the surface, the planet had resurrected itself. If you could have stood on Earth in that moment, though no living creature yet could, you would have witnessed the power of pure resilience. Steam rising from melted ice sheets, volcanoes blazing along the horizon, the air vibrating with heat and thunder. It was both terrifying and beautiful, creation in its rawest form. The world was not peaceful, but it was alive. And from that life-giving chaos, everything else would one day emerge. Every forest, every mountain, every ocean wave, all of it traces back to that volcanic rebirth. Even now, the echoes of that ancient power remain. The same heat that once melted glaciers still fuels the volcanoes that shape our continents. The same minerals that once flowed from the Earth's core still nourish life in the deepest seas. This was not just the planet's recovery, it was its awakening. Earth had learned to transform destruction into creation, to turn fire into fertility, to rise from its own ashes. It was the moment when our world became more than just rock and ice. It became a living system capable of sustaining the fragile spark that would soon follow. The world had burned. It had frozen. It had shaken itself apart and stitched itself back together again. And now, after billions of years of chaos, something extraordinary began to happen. The fire quieted, the skies cleared, and the steam that once wrapped the planet began to cool and fall as rain. Not for days, not for months, but for thousands upon thousands of years. The endless downpour sculpted the world, carving canyons, filling craters, and quenching the scorched crust. The molten rivers hardened into stone. The air, once thick with poison, now shimmered with mist. And below, water began to gather, slow, deep, unstoppable. The first oceans of Earth were being born. Every drop that fell carried the memory of what came before, the ash of volcanoes, the minerals of mountains, the remnants of meteor storms. The rain wasn't pure. It was heavy with dissolved iron, sulfur, and carbon. It hissed as it struck the ground, eating away at rock and soil, breaking the world down into its smallest parts. Those minerals and chemicals were carried by runoff into growing basins where water began to collect. What had been molten plains were now shimmering lakes. What had been deserts of fire became dark seas. Imagine standing at the edge of that new world. The land is still hot beneath your feet, but before you stretches an ocean that seems to have no end, a restless expanse of gray-green water reflecting a sky finally free of smoke. Steam rises where waves meet lava. The air smells of metal and salt. Lightning still flickers across the horizon, but its fury has softened into rhythm. The earth has exhaled. The storm is over. But within these waters, the real story was only beginning. Every chemical ingredient of life, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, swirled together in this massive cauldron. The oceans were not calm. They were alive with reaction. Sunlight filtered through the atmosphere and struck the waves, fueling chemical bonds. The tides, pulled gently by the newborn moon, churned the waters endlessly, mixing the ingredients again and again. The seas became laboratories, vast planetary experiments in creation. It was here, in this salty, mineral-rich soup, that the first whispers of life began to form. Tiny molecules, sparked by lightning or warmed by volcanic vents, started to join, break, and rejoin in endless combinations. They created fragile chains of energy and matter that could copy themselves, the first true ancestors of everything that would ever live. No eyes saw it, no mind understood it, but in the silence beneath the waves, life had taken its first breath. These oceans became the cradle of all that would follow. The chemistry that began here would lead to cells, to organisms, to evolution itself. From the shallow shores to the deep abyss, the seas became Earth's great incubator. Even now, billions of years later, life still depends on those same waters. Every drop in every vein, every ocean wave, every cloud in the sky, they all trace us back to that first formation, that moment when Earth found its calm and learned to nurture instead of destroy. As the oceans spread, the climate stabilized, the atmosphere grew thicker with new gases released from the depths, the sun shone brighter than before, and for the first time, light and water danced together across the surface of the world. The once violent planet had found balance. What had begun as destruction had become beauty. From dust, fire, and ice, a blue world emerged, fragile, perfect, and alive. If you could look at Earth from space then, you'd see something astonishing, a glowing blue orb wrapped in thin white clouds, floating silently against the blackness. The same image that fills us with wonder today first appeared then. The Earth had become what it was meant to be, a home not yet for us, but for the miracle that would come. And that miracle was near, for beneath those gentle waves, evolution was preparing its next act, one that would change everything. The story of Earth's violent childhood was ending. The story of life was about to begin. A next topic will be the Cambrian explosion, life's big bang, from single-celled whispers to a sudden burst of complexity. This is the moment when Earth's oceans exploded with life, eyes, shells, predators, and the first great struggle for survival.